So, a lot of people ask, why do we measure soil health? Or sometimes I ask a farmer, do you measure soil health? And they'll say, oh yeah, I just found out my nitrogen levels last week. And it's a really common mistake because we often confuse agronomy with ecosystem health. But they're actually really different things. And that doesn't mean they don't correlate, and that doesn't mean that they're not both equally important, because you have to be able to produce food and have a business to support the efforts that you make towards your environmental sustainability. But they're really different. So we're looking at not necessarily the production potential, the nitrogen, the phosphorus. That's not what we're measuring when we're looking at soil health. That is called a fertility test. We are looking at soil quality. And soil quality is essentially the ability for that soil to function as a soil. So does anybody know what soil's functions are? There's a handful, and there's a lot of right answers, but
Water storage.
yes, water storage. Yep. It's a medium for plant growth. It's a place for roots to exist. What else? It purifies water, right? So it helps water purify and make it down to groundwater. Any other ones? Yep. Yes, it's a habitat. It's a place for organisms and invertebrates, and sometimes even small mammals like moles to live. So it's yes. Yes, that's actually another one. So it's a place for us to grow upon. It's a structural component that we use in our human life. It also cycles nutrients. So the organisms that live in the soil decompose and break down organic matter. So can you imagine what the forest floor would look like if nothing broke down ever? Right? You would just be like tromping through like meters and meters and meters of dead leaves all the time, and there would never be soil to see. So really important. It cycles nutrients. And lastly, it's an atmospheric regulator too. So there's gas exchanges that are constantly happening with the soil and the atmosphere so that plants can survive and people can survive. And as I think most of you know, it stores a lot of carbon, more than plants and rocks combined on the surface. It does a huge amount of storage of carbon. And we want the carbon to stay there. So it has a lot of functions, and that's what we're focusing on when we talk about soil health. The ability for the soil to function as an ecosystem for plants, animals, and humans.
And many of those systems we need on our farm. So
yes,
although they're
yes.
ecosystem services, a lot of the if our soil is at if it's healthy, it'll provide services that we need for nutrient uptake, for water infiltration to make sure our crops are getting water, temperature. So there's a huge range of services that we need our soil to perform for us, and that we can overlook, and we can just get used to this dysfunction.
Right.
So that's how we're linking really the ecosystem services to farm services. So it's a change in mentality, like Jason was talking about, from a paradigm of just production, but it's kind of also, it's not just about preserving the ecosystem, it's about these services that we need our farm to provide.
Right. And so once you understand the soil function, then it starts to be a really similar conversation as to what Jason was talking about, where now you're looking at indicators of poor soil health resulting in a resource concern. So I have all these things wrong with my soil because I haven't been taking care of it perhaps, or maybe I got it that way, and now I have compaction, and that's impacting my ability to grow. And there's all these things wrong with my soil, it's not functioning as an ecosystem, and now I have runoff, and now I have low carbon, and now I have erosion, and it starts to sound a lot more like what Andy was saying, where it's like, hey, I wasn't really thinking about the environment, but it's actually starting to really affect me. And the problem with it is it might take 10 or 30 years of constant production before you start to notice that the ecosystem is really becoming degraded. But if you can look at the ecosystem and kind of keep track of it more regularly, that will automatically link back into the production, and it's kind of an indicator for your future production potential. So it's just mindful to be thinking about both of those things simultaneously, because while they're different goals, they're the same action to take care of them. And if you take care of one, you're going to take care of the other. So I want to direct your attention to this graph. And the reason that I do is because we get the question a lot, like I said in the beginning of this, is why do we test for it? Why is it important? And it's because you don't know how well you're doing if you don't take a measurement. And it's just going back, I don't need to repeat myself, but this medical analogy, if you don't ever have a measurement, how would you ever know how you're doing? And the next question is like, well, what about field tests? What about lab tests? Do I have to pay $150 every year to test my soil 20 times across my field? No, you don't have to do that. You might want to do that every once in a while so that you can get that kind of fine-tuned number the way that you tests are really useful because they give you some groundwork. They give you the ability to just kind of gauge for yourself where you're at, and they supplement some laboratory testing. But if you really want to know precisely, laboratory testing can be really, really useful. The bigger your production is, the more money you're putting into mulch and compost, you might want to start noting if that's working for you. Because if it's not, maybe don't spend so much money on it. And that's where we start to look at the economics of this. Is this feasible for me to put compost down on 5 acres once a year, every year? If I'm not seeing any change, and it's been 10 years of doing that, maybe I need to change what I'm doing just a little bit. Maybe it needs something else. So we're talking about two different things there, but they're both great tools. In-person field assessments, lab diagnostics. Regarding lab diagnostics, there's two options on Island. They have pros and cons for each. So you'll notice I have listed here their contact information if you're interested in getting testing. One of them is the laboratory at UH. The Crow Laboratory, it's about $150 per sample. It's not open to just sending samples in. You need to contact them in advance and make sure they can do it because they're not at capacity yet to assist all farmers across the island. So they're still working up their ability to be a regular service lab. There's also Pete Bunn's Brookside Laboratories. It's cheaper. You can send things in. You should always contact him first if you're going to be putting something in the mail or dropping it off at his lab, just so he anticipates it because he checks it like every 7 to 10 days at the office. But the pros and cons there is that the university lab is a little more tailored because it's Hawaii specific. Pete's lab is mainland focused. So you guys know Hawaii soil is different. I don't have to explain that to you. We don't operate the same way the mainland does. Our soils are wicked different. Our environment's wicked different. So if you're going to get a soils test and you really want it to be fine-tuned, I do recommend the university lab. But if you're looking for some general information and you just kind of want to get like a ballpark, maybe you don't want to spend a ton of money on it, Pete's lab is awesome, really efficient, and they're ready and they're set up for this kind of thing. So truly some pros and cons there. But you can always talk to us about it if you have more questions. We don't need to focus on it right now. And there is a backside to this sheet, but I'm going to save that for when we're in the field. So we can move along here kind of in a timely fashion. But those are some of the guidelines that I have for when we're taking soil samples to submit to the laboratories. And that'll just be real quick, kind of go over the basics so that when you're out there by yourself, you're taking a really good sample and it's not getting skewed.
So you're gonna show us how to take a sample.
Yep.
Will you share with us the information that you get back?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll talk about that in the field.
We can do it now or there.
Because I think that's the big thing is, what information we get back and how we use that and how is that different than the soil fertility?
Yeah, I can glaze over it now. If we want to cover it more when we're in the field, we can informally ask questions, whatever you want. But essentially, you'll get back a suite of indicators just like the medical test. So it would be like if you're going in and you're getting a bunch of blood work, you'll get different numbers for all of them. We would do an aggregate stability test. We would be doing water holding capacity, pH, things like that. It goes in, they run all the samples, they get a number for each one, and then they give you kind of a ballpark of like, hey, it's kind of like the penetrometer actually, like how it has the color rating. It's kind of saying like, you're in the green zone, this is a good number for you. Or you're in the red zone, it's not a very good number for you. The problem is that there are a lot of different soils in Hawaii. There's 10 of the 12 world varieties here. So to say that an apple is like an orange, it's kind of that. It's like, well, it doesn't taste like a very good apple. It's like, because it's an orange. So that's why it's not a very good apple. So when you put those standards all across the board for the different types of soils we have here, you might say, God, that's such a bad soil. It's such low carbon. But for that type of soil, that's actually like an exceptional amount of carbon, because that's what its potential is. So it's difficult for that reason. I'm saying this because it's not a perfect science. When you get these results back, they might say, you're in the red. But on the soil that you have, if you're on like one of these red dirt oxasols and you get 4% carbon back on your test, you're actually doing okay. Like, that's not that bad, If you were on a vertisol over in Waianae and you got 4%, I'd say you got something wrong. That's not supposed to be like that. So, moral of the story is, science is working to progress the way that we measure that and the way that we tell people how good their results are. But you have to be mindful that it's an index. It is a spectrum of health. There is no perfect, you fit into this box, your pH was 7, you're good to go. It's just tons of diversity. So, you get all these numbers back. They'll do their best guess based on your soil type to give you an accurate answer and say, hey, you're generally kind of this type of soil. Generally, this is what you expect for you. You're doing all right, you know? And that's what you get out of the test. Sometimes they will provide recommendations for you after the test and say, your soil diversity, biodiversity is really low. We would recommend compost because that's going to add microbes. Your test showed that you don't really have a lot of microbes. So that's kind of the result that you could get. Or we might say, your pH is actually really low, so we're going to recommend that you amend your soil to, change your pH a little bit. Things like that. And then lastly, I would say that if you're really curious about it and you want to know more about the details of your soil health test, you can often pay more for a consultation after. Like, I think Pete charges like $60 for recommendations after you get a soil test back. The UH lab, it kind of comes with it, so it's not super personalized, but it gives a list of recommendations based on the score you got and the soil type you're in.